You're listening to KWOU. Coming up next, the amazing, unbelievable adventures of Dr. Theophilius Crux, Ph.D., and his faithful companion Archibald the Tasmanian emu. You may not believe you, and you don't have to, but it's half true, so I ask you, have you prepared? Sometimes I tell myself that I'm Jasper Beck, and that this is the amazing, unbelievable adventures of Dr. Theophilius Crux, Ph.D., and his faithful companion Archibald the Tasmanian emu. Previously, in this unbelievable tale, there was a death in the family. Or rather, not a death, but a falling into the void. I suppose the nomenclature of non-existence doesn't really matter. They all shake out the same way in the end. What I'm trying to say is that we lost Luce. He lowered his lure a bit too low, and nothing bit down and pulled him right in, or rather out, into abject absence. And while the rest of the world clamors for attention as its 118th remaining day bursts forth in brilliant green, a few wandering clumps with names are chewing their way through the grieving process. They aren't making too much headway. They are making too much pancake batter. It's particularly difficult to navigate the city streets while discombobulated by the foggy influence of love lost. Love lost, you say? They barely even knew him. True, I repudiate, but since when was that ever a prerequisite for love? Since when was knowledge at all entangled in the blackberry bushes of love? No, it will grow where it will, for people you don't even know. For people you've never heard or seen, for no person at all, just for its own sake. And when it is ripped from you, you will be discombobulated. You will wander the streets of the city aimlessly, guided by useless muses whispering used inspirations into your ear. And you will wind up making blueberry pancakes for the last annual Parabolippian sweater drive for the Dolphins at dusk. And that's exactly what they were doing. Fuchsia, Augustine, Mrs. Hatter, and batter. Copious, goopy blueberry pancake batter threatening to devour all it touched. They were running out of time. Soon the sweaterers would swarm the venue, and then all would be lost if there were no blueberry pancakes on which to die. No, how they'd protest! And the cooks three would have to plead, no, we don't hate the Dolphins, we just are rather horrible cooks, ill-equipped to combat the batter now bubbling out of its bowl. Please, spare us your vitriol. And they would not listen, for sweaterers know no mercy. They know only their undying love for dolphins and blueberry pancakes. And so, they must bake. How did we get ourselves into this mess? Wondered Augustine, choking out a tendril of dough. I thought it had just been thoroughly established that we had simply stumbled into it after being blindsided by grief, grumbled Fuchsia, painfully aware of her position on the page below the exposition. Well, I suppose it doesn't matter much anymore. The fact of the matter is that if we don't do something about this batter, we will likely all be killed, along with an incalculable number of sweaterless dolphins, said Mrs. Hatter, pulverizing the abominable amalgam as it tried desperately to escape her grasp. Augustine slammed to the table her lump of dough. What's the point of this? Are we really cowering in fear before a horde of mere sweaterers? There's nothing at stake. 2 of us are vampires and 1 of us is rich. Who can stand against us if we simply left? Mrs. Hatter scoffs and coughs a cloud of flour. Vampires and your insufferable sense of immortality. Don't you know this crowd is the demographic most likely to have already clocked your vampiric nature and subsequently prepared the necessary countermeasures to keep you in line? Fuchsia froze in fear, but Augustine guffawed. Please, you mean garlic and holy water, the whole shebang? I'll let you in on a secret, little Miss Widebrim, because that ridiculous list of tchotchke is the poster child for my former company's propaganda department. It's all a ruse. I know that, Augustine. Giving the peons a false sense of the ability to rebel is an effective way to manufacture consent for oppression. Vampire 101. I'm talking about the real list. Augustine's countenance became more graven than its naturally graven state. Who told you about that? Mrs. Hatter smiled. Let's just say that vampires become more talkative than their naturally talkative state when you pay for the drinks at your local smoky downtown poetry bar. Did you hear that whole city went up in smoke? Chimed Fuchsia. No, what about it? The others said in unison. It went up in smoke. All at once. A blank stare of unrecognition. Fuchsia sighed and went back to kneading the pancake batter and dolloping it into the muffin tin. Augustine grabbed Mrs. Hatter by the collar. How much do you know? Please, what are you going to do? Kill me? Go ahead. Seems like the only thing you vampires are good for anyhow. She was in her face now. What did he tell you? Mrs. Hatter shrugged. Doesn't matter, right? Augustine hesitated and snatched the hat off the head of now Mrs. Not Hatter, holding it above the mixing bowl of certain doughy death. Mrs. Not Hatter raged against Augustine's iron fist. I will make your life a living hell. Sounds fun. The batter gibbered hungrily. What did that ingrat tell you? The string section finished their glissando, and the two hung there for a moment in unborn violence, the absurdity of the situation bleeding through like a muddy puddle through linen sheets, but both revolted against it, simultaneously declaring to themselves that they would carry on just to spite that muddy puddle. How dare it declare the futility of their struggle? How dare it remind them that in less than 118 days the curtains would fall. The two locked eyes, and in their mutual enmity for each other they forged a pact to never let this go. And when the rest of the world would fall away, at the very least, they would always have each other. Hatred to the end of time. Anyway, Fuchsia had taken the opportunity to destroy the hat of contention and the entirety of blueberry batter with her still developing eyes of fiery ire, and waited patiently for them to realize their proverbial poker chips were gone. It took them a solid 11 seconds. And when they slowly turned to her, she said, We should run, because the sweaterers are here. And I should run, because I don't think either of you are to the point of being able to forgive me yet. Maybe in time. But for now, they took off like stray bullets down the streets of Peripolis. The cameraman sighed because he was tired. He didn't want to go chasing after them, finding yet another way to spice up a chase scene. In all honesty, he wanted to go home, but he wasn't off the clock till 4, which was an arbitrarily long amount of time away from now, so he opted for a different approach. He set down his camera, pointing it towards the happy mountains in the west, hit record, and took a nap. This is what the camera captured. A stray dog wanders down a dirt road, thinking about the time he couldn't save the ones he loved most. A tumbleweed tumbles like a weed toward the viewer, crackling like stale popcorn on the floor of a depressing moving theater. A bench sits under a street lamp, wondering drunkenly about the irony of a bench's ability to sit, realizing with a gasp that he is thus the epitome of form following function, and passes out. No one notices him because he is a bench. The mountains sing and the sun scolds them, telling them to keep quiet for the 4th time this evening. There will be 7 more times. The author sits at his desk, quietly typing away at his keys, reading his words aloud to himself as he goes. He's grown tired of himself as a subject, or of anything as a subject, even subjectlessness. He wishes it didn't have to be this way, this eternal oscillation between caring and not caring, but then immediately doubts his own guttural assumption that things did have to be this way, and then scolds himself for being so disconnected from reality that he would doubt what he gutturally knew to be true, slapping his own hand as he tries to place quotation marks around the word new. So if it does have to be this way, and it is just a fact of life that I have to at least feel the drive to undermine whatever I set up, and set up whatever I undermine, then how can we continue? If we say I simply oscillate between the two, then it will merely become yet another subject I need to undermine, thus creating an infinite chain of meta-undermining, which might be a subject within itself to undermine, and so on. As soon as anything becomes encapsulated, it becomes corruptible, which I suppose is the entire purpose of this extended rant, because as soon as I stop myself, I become bored. I realize now that freedom is key here, and it is less about what is being written and more about how it is being written, at least for me. For me to survive myself, the process must be irreducible, thus evading any attempt to package it up and throw it away as yet another framework to undermine. I can't say with complete honesty or certainty that that habit is a framework in itself, since it pertains to the nature of the content's creation and not the content itself. A robot might as well attempt to undermine the methods by which its eccentric and reclusive creator created its own ability to attempt to undermine things. There really is an outside to all of this. There is space beyond Ouroboros. There are stars beyond Jormungandr. That's refreshing for someone like me, even if it is a delusion. Or maybe because it is a delusion. I don't know. I don't think knowing's the point. The whole reason it's beyond that infinite cycle is because it's a matter of doing rather than thinking. The sheer brute physicality of moving my hands across this keyboard is what allows the escape from the recursive hell of my brain. I may very well have expectations for myself, but they are most certainly prey to the great serpent. The very moment when the lack of expectations becomes an expectation was when the wind was stolen from under my wings. And so, I rant. I move my fingers across the keyboard, and it feels good. Fuchsia and Tina and Augustine and Mrs. Nothatter are having tea now. It has been months since they ran from the Sweaterers and days since they began drinking tea. They cannot stop. "Are you enjoying your tea?" Tina said. "It's good," said Augustine. "It's good," said Fuchsia. "It's good," said Mrs. Nothatter, suddenly aware of the strange incongruity of her past memories and her current situation. "Where the hell are we?" Tina tittered. "I won't lie to you, Mrs. Nothatter. I inserted myself into the narrative as a kind of parasite to feed off the potential characterization and catharsis you three might have experienced, being main characters and all." "Oh, that's odd. Usually the trope is that we all don't realize we're being parasitized until one of us figures it out." "Exactly." "Ah, I see. Your tactic is based in the hope that by depriving the story of any kind of narrative cohesion, you can more effectively keep the catharsis and characterization you so require locked within us, without a chance to express itself." "That's exactly right." Augustine stood. "Well, that's great then, because I just had a profound moment of story-driven character development, which must mean your plan isn't working." Fuchsia frowned. "What? You did? I didn't see anything. Those things don't just happen. I thought they were supposed to be, led up to." "Nope, just did." "Well, what is it?" "Not gonna tell you, don't have to." And Augustine flew off. The remaining two turned back to question Tina, but she disappeared. As it turns out, she was just a figment of a collective hallucination they were both having as they were having the living nightlights knocked out of them by a vengeful mob of sweaterers. They regretted doubting Tina and wanted to go back. But alas, life is pain, and so they took solace in knowing they were alive, whatever that's supposed to mean. "How dare you hate the dolphins, you dolphin haters!" A wooden cane. "Your lives are worthless, and your cooking is worth even less!" A shard of glass. "I'm deeply unsatisfied with my failed attempts at self-actualization, and thus am consigning myself to a blatant metanarrative that erases myself from the picture as a semi-conscious coping mechanism that fails to speak to the true problems I find within my existence, but makes me feel like something makes sense at least once in a while, if only for a moment. Can you blame me?" A pause, and then a crowbar to the teeth. "No, you can't, dolphin haters!" This ontological onslaught would continue for the next 3 hours, just as it had been allotted for in the sweaterer's itinerary the month before. To pass the time, a musical interlude, followed by a lucid recitation of Poems from the Void, Part 2, by Luce, the Increasingly Sad Man. You're listening to KWOU. I love you. Isn't it funny? I would try to make excuses, but it's useless in the face of you. I need you. For the money. I can't sustain this dissonant chord with listening more to jazz. I feel it. In my bones. As if my very own soul were thrown off the cliffs I missed from my childhood, but I'm good. No, really, I'm good. Listen, I could use you once in a while. It's so easy for those whose status quo is so much wilder than mine, but my mind is so quiet all the time when it comes to you. It's a void, a big void, an old void, a big old void indeed. It's chalk grated vigorously against asphalt until you scrape your fingers void. It's dusty, is what I'm saying. And I'm joking. Because I find it funny that I love you, or rather something of you, something in you, in bone and sinew. Wait, don't stop, please! Continue. In your ways, I try to lose myself, but find it anyways. I choose myself over you, because I'm so over you. You're a tear in my tapestry, I'll sew over you. Ah, you can feel me revolting against you, I know. You find me here revolting, but I find you insulting to my sense of significance. I'm sick of if it gets better, I'm better now. I'm sick of being so bitter, I bet I'm better off now that I know that I'm a fraud. I fell for you. In you. That sweet what could have been you. I'm sorry. I haven't seen you in a long time. Can I come in? And stay forever? My case is empty, my mouth is shut. I dash my ship against the rocks and frolic in the waves to get a taste of what they have. Surely the pools are whirling for other fools like me. I sound so certain, that's new. Who knew I'd find a sense of newness in this old blueness where it feels like it's all the same? Well, I guess I've changed. Luce woke up on a bench under a street lamp. It was muttering to itself about self-referentiality, and then promptly shut up. Luce sat up. His breath was steady and relaxed. He looked at the mountains to his right and the city to his left, and he nodded his head. He rubbed his eyes and cried for a long time. Meanwhile, Augustine had succeeded in convincing the angry mob to live authentically by embracing the absurdity of the incongruity between their seemingly innate desire for meaning and the world's cold indifference to it. And by that I mean she brutally murdered every one of them, because Matt Brown was the philosophical one, not her. Still, if any of them had survived, it would have been a powerful visual aid to that point. "Are you guys okay?" asked Augustine. as she rent the last sweaterer in two. Of course we do. We have plot armor. We do? I thought it was firmly established that we didn't have plot armor. Precisely to the contrary. It was not established that we didn't have plot armor, but it also wasn't not established that we didn't have plot armor. Thus we exist in a nebulous state between necessary and expendable. Then how can you so confidently say we have plot armor? I can't. Did you not hear the quavering doubt in my voice? Besides, the very term suggests the existence of a plot, and we all know we aren't going to get one of those, so we can't expect its related armor, and yet we persist. So, I see this as a kind of evidence of a kind of meta-plot armor. As long as we are self-aware about the possibility of our expendability, we contribute to the state of nebulousness, perpetuating it without committing to either definite outcome, remaining in a constant state of being able to, but never doing so. Thus, we are shielded for harm by knowing we don't have plot armor. Simple, you see? But if we're self-aware about our self-awareness, doesn't that lead the narrative to a new kind of meta-stability, thus opening up vulnerabilities to new kinds of meta-stakes and thus meta-harm? Not if we transcend that stability with yet another layer of self-awareness ad infinitum. This constant loop of self-reference, ever referential to increasingly larger sets, is unresolvable, and thus we remain as we are, never decided as one or the other. Well, what if we throw away all this meta-nonsense and something gets posited, positively? It can't. The serpent would devour that too. There's no escape from the loop. That's its main feature. That's why it binds the world. Suddenly, everything seems extremely claustrophobic. On the contrary, you are free. As nothing is decided, nothing can pin you down. In your nothingness, you are anything you want to be. Who? Fair point, forget I said anything. Look, a bird! A bird landed on a street lamp and said, Hey, were you guys aware that due to the lack of dialogue tags, it was unclear who was speaking during the last exchange? Oh, we know, we just thought it didn't matter that much. Thank you, though. Hey, no problem, said the bird, letting its poop fall onto the shoulder of a weeping man in order to cheer him up and show him he's not alone. The man looked up. Thanks, bird, said the bird, before flipping away. Luce saw Mrs. Nothatter standing in a pile of bodies alongside two vampires. Apparently she had taken a liking to the undead. Luce smiled. Matt Brown was rubbing off on her. He stood and de-pooped his jacket and walked up to see his friends. The three of them stood in awe and in blood. Like the mountains, they wept at the sight of him and ran to embrace him. I knew you'd be back, Fuchsia trembled. I knew you would, I knew you would, I knew you would, I knew. Luce smiled weakly and looked at Mrs. Nothatter. I've never seen your haircut before. It looks good. Mrs. Nothatter frowned to hide her blushing. That was some dirty trick you pulled, disappearing like that. Don't ever do that again. I can't promise that I won't, Luce shrugged. He looked at Augustine. It's just not who I am. Augustine extended a hand. I don't believe we've ever formally met. It may be that we never will. He walked over and hugged her. I'm Luce. Augustine coldly resisted him, if only out of spite. Augustine. I've heard a lot about you, mildly sad man. Oh, I don't think I'm mildly sad anymore, but thank you. Wait, if you're not mildly sad anymore, what are you? It was essentially your only defining feature. Well, look who's talking, Mrs. Nothatter. I guess we've all grown. To answer your question, though, I'm not quite sure. For a moment there, I was increasingly sad, but as you might suspect, that state was hardly sustainable, so I'm currently in between epithets at the moment. I trust one will come rolling along when the moment is right. So, just Luce for now? Yeah. Luce looked back at the sleeping bench under the street lamp and breathed a heavy sigh. Just Luce for now. The four looked around at each other, each waiting for the other to say something akin to, "Well, where to next?" to signal the continuation of their merry journey together across desolation. But they never got around to saying it. I think they were just enjoying the idea of it all, savoring the moment right before adventure much more than they would its realization. The cameraman is paid much better when he's able to capture some kind of action, so he gave up on the quartet and decided to do a little video documentary on the streets of Peripolis. Really get in tune with the city, get a feel for the spirit, the ghost within that grand old machine of industry that pumps out human experience by the gallon, among other experiences. This is what his camera captured by force. High-rises rising high above dry houses, drowning drowsily below thunderous overpasses, passing overhead the people headed over to their neighbors' houses to stick their wayward noses into their whereabouts at 10:45 p.m. Catwalks above the highway, and train tracks above that, just beneath a raised garden crisscrossed by sky trolley interwoven intimately with power lines, housing suspicious amounts of uniformly dressed birds, chatting politely about bird things like weather and therapy sessions, and shiny plastic wrappers tossed guiltily into the wind. A conquering worm of people slithering up the main thoroughfare, blocking the road entirely with their footwork and fanfare. It seems they are celebrating. For on their shoulders they carry aloft a champion in Matt Brown, his fists held high in victory against the world. "Pinball!" he proclaims. "Tonight we all are pinball!" He drowns the words in caustic froth, and the crowd roars in time. An old man who has not stood for years feels an exhilarating rush of emotion down his spine that sends his torso hurling into the adoring crowd, and for a moment he can fly again. A goblin feels totally free from the box society has put him in, and he opens its cardboard flaps to say hello, and society greets him with open arms, the same arms that had duct-taped him to his fate years ago. They laugh together. A spectacled silver fox and his off-brand ostrich slink defeated into the alleyways, feeling stripped of their rightful glory as purveyors of pure pinball. But just when they thought they were free to wallow, the crowd swallows them in adoration and applauded them for purveying, if not the art's purity, then the art's insecurity. Hail! These roaming too, let their story be broadcast from atop the highest tower to the lowest caverns in the jowls of the earth. So the crowd roared, and the float they called Matt Brown glanced upon a conspicuous group of monochromatic misfits. "Hey!" cheered Matt Brown, the party float. "Look who's here, everybody! The main characters!" The crowd cheered in disgust. They think things matter. They revel in their arcs, their oh so precious narrative cohesion, their commitment to artistry. The crowd gurgled in loathing. Luce strode to approach Matt Brown, the party float. "This isn't you, Matt Brown. You are not pathetic enough to be epitheted." Ooh, the protagonist speaks. He seeks to engage the antagonist in righteous battle, in symbolic and cathartic conflict. Ha! What delusions have grasped your mind, Luce, the increasingly mad man? You have lost your eyes to see the fluidity of the quicksilver that makes up this alchemical outing of ours. You're spouting nonsense, Matt Brown. You've lost your touch. You used to be charming in your lack of charm, but now I find you have to try. Gross. You used to be effortless. You cannot bully me with ad hominem attacks. I am no homonym to begin with, and even if I was, I could still recognize your futile attempts at trying to distract from the problem. Your story lacks direction, and you'd be willing to watch the world burn in 118 days just for you. I want to party. Who's the villain here? You are. You said so yourself. They were standing eye to eye now, the crowd churning around them. I never said I was the villain. I said I was the antagonist. Mark my words, Luce. You will cry out in ecstasy for the end of the agony I will inflict upon you. Do it, Matt Brown. Serial killer. Vampire. Fraud. I've been through nothing and back to meet you. Go on. Make my day. Matt Brown was silent, and then giggled, gurgled, and laughed, and laughed, and laughed, and brought his wrath to bear on the shoulders of the world, and all despaired in ecstasy. Tune in next week for the next episode. Never before has a man been so bold to stand up triumphantly upon the end of infinity and declare with the fire in his chest, I'm Jasper Beck, and that this is the amazing, unbelievable adventures of Dr. Theophilius Crux, Ph.D., and his faithful companion, Archibald the Tasmanian Emu. You're listening to KWOU.